Hello, I am the great Phantoma Gaston. No, I'm not. Um, I am Anthony, and I like to do art stuff. So I'm going to do a small, I guess, tutorial about how I do things in Pixelover, which is a very cool little program. Normally, you would want to have a sprite to work with, or some kind of art that you want to manipulate. Um, I'm not going to get into the drawing process. There are a million drawing tutorials everywhere, and it varies wildly based on what program you use. This is specifically for Pixelover and specifically for how I use it to take shortcuts, for lack of a better term. So once you have your graphic, you're going to want to split it up into pieces. You don't have to do this. I find that it is very helpful, though. Now that we have a new project and I have all of the pieces I need, I can paste them here, and I want to import them as different images. If, for example, I wanted to add parts to an existing image, import as animated image is very nice, but for the purposes of this, not important. Now that I have this, I'm going to have four keyframes on this. And as you can see, it's a bunch of parts, it's all jumbled up. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing or what I'm looking at. So I'm going to make a bone, uses bone animation, but we're not there yet. Make a bone, call it pose one, and duplicate it a couple times. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each part, and I'm going to separate them and put them into their respective bone so I can make them visible or invisible as I see fit. I'm also going to take the time to arrange them properly, so when we come back and they're all put together, you won't be like, what else did you do? I just put them together. It's like a puzzle piece. Okay, but let me do that real quick. Okay, so we're back, and you can see the library over here looks a lot cleaner, and I can toggle on which pose I want to do. So we can click the little animation tab down here, shake off, because that's what she's supposed to be doing in the animation. She's shaking stuff off. I go to each of these bones and make a visible keyframe. What this is going to do is I can, whenever I toggle them now on the timeline, it's going to properly show up here. Of note, I like to keep it to 1 second because then you can control exactly how many frames you get out of this. It's up to you. Fiddle around with it, see what works best for you. But anyway, back to the thing. Suppose one, so on point two, point three, or no, point four, point six. You can see these are all kind of spaced out, so I'll just gather all of those together. So the reason that the reason I said that you don't have to cut your sprites into smaller pieces is because of the mesh feature that Pixelover has, which I will demonstrate with this piece of cloth, which I have to bring to the front because I am brain. So we'll do that one there, and this one is in the back, but I'm going to flip it. And I don't need to make a mesh of this one, it's just going to be kind of there. Back flap. Front flap. So now that you see, now that I'm not insane anymore, we have this button here, the deform tool. You click it, it'll bring up this menu, and there are some settings here. You don't have to fuck around with them too much, or mess around with them. I need to stop cursing. The only one that I do is simplify. I like to bring that down to 1. And what this does is this will turn whatever you have selected into a plane, and that's some weird lingo talk. A plane is essentially a 3D model that is just a flat piece of paper, essentially. And these little dots are all like vertices. You should know how 3D models work if you're looking at this program. If you're looking at me, then we want to go to Edit. We want to make it. Normally, you're supposed to put more thought into this and kind of like dictate where it's going to be bending and how it's going to be moving. I just put pieces everywhere that makes sense to me. Then we make a bone. B is the bone hotkey, but it is very finicky. And you'll notice that these bones are all children of this front flap, and that's important. Because now we can go to deform, we can go to bones, toggle all, and that will adjust weights for everything. And now that that's done, when we move these around, the sprite will deform and try to follow the bones as best it can. This is not perfect. Sometimes you get some weird nonsense going on, but it is very handy for cloth and organic items, and I find it works very well. And I have been using it as, for lack of a better term, a shortcut because I have a lot of stuff I need to get done. So you're going to want to repeat this process for the important pieces on this character. And now what I mean, that's the trick here, is the important parts. Remember earlier how I said with this back flap item or piece, I'm not going to make that a 3D mesh? It's not important. At most, it's going to just wiggle a little bit. I don't want anybody to focus on it. I don't want anybody to give a shit. So it's not, leave it alone. But so, like as another example, because it's always nice to have more examples, let's hide the arms. Go into the torso, because this is going to be a more complicated one. Again, simplify 1, edit. If any part of the sprite or piece that you're working with is outside of this little box, it will be invisible, by the way. So like I can move this here. You can see how it's grayed out. And then if I go to this thing again, oh, look, it's gone. Which I thought about doing some neat stuff with at some point. Nothing has come to mind yet. I can edit that again. Okay, now we got the outline done. We're going to want to put focus on her face and her assets, as is the way. And you just kind of want to put these wherever there should be like a crease. So that way when the model bends, it'll actually have it. So one thing I'm going to do is, because this one is going to have so many bones, I'm going to put a parent bone here. Don't have to name it, I just like doing that. So that way I can hide them or move them around, move this whole thing around there. Once I have a parent bone, you're not going to make this like a 3D mesh. You're not going to make this like a skeleton. You're only going to focus on the parts of the sprite or the parts of the piece that you're working with, and you're only going to focus on the parts that move or the parts that don't move. So like I don't want her face to move around very much, so I'm putting a bone there because I'm putting some bones in her hair and her shoulders. And what's going to happen is when I move these, if there is not a bone here, it's going to make her face freak out. It freaks out anyway, but it freaks out less when you do it this way. So go back into bones, toggle all. Now one thing, you'll notice the parent bone here is toggled. It's got a color in it. We don't want that. We want to hide the parent bone. Or not hide it, we want to take it out of this little checkbox. You don't have to do this all the time. It's just specifically for the more complicated ones like these that have a parent bone. I don't usually give them to everything that I work on. I forgot to hit the automatically set weight button. Now that that's done, I can move things around. But you see how, like, as I move this more and more of the character's face gets twisted and distorted. If this bone was not here, the automatic weighting system would have put weights here instead. And ooh, that's a fun shape. Ooh. Anyway, so that's the reason that bone is there. If for whatever reason it still gets stretched out, like if this goes over here, I can move it over here to kind of keep the face a little consistent so I can go over it later as I need to. A final example before I cut to actually like piecing these all together will be the legs. Editing them again. So these legs aren't supposed to move a whole hell of a lot in the animation. So all I'm going to do is put a crease down here, and then I'm going to apply the bones. Wait, no, just the one set of bones. It's not a 3D mesh. You don't need two sets of bones. It's not. She's not going to be walking with these. Now, since there's no parent bone, just toggle all, automatically set weights. There you go. And now I'm going to repeat this process for all of the, again, the important pieces. Doesn't have to be every piece. Doesn't have to be like perfect and meticulous, just the pieces that you're going to focus on. And I will be back after that. So as we're going through this, you can see that I've started incorporating her shoulders into the upper torso and the parts. That's because midway through I realized that her shoulders aren't going to move a whole lot. She's just lifting her arms up and then kind of waving them down, like you shake your hands after you wash them. And anyway, because these are a part of the main piece, of the torso piece, I am separating them with these little vertices. So that way, when I deform it with the bones, it's not going to freak out anymore. Okay, so that's all done. And it took too fucking long. It's a very tedious process, and I wish it went faster. Oh wait, no, I'm not done yet. I haven't done the bones! Oh no. Okay, now they are all situated. Okay. Everyone has bones? Everyone has bones. It's very good, yes. Uh, so now we have the animation going on where we see where all keyframes are going to what all individual poses. Oh, before I forget, you can do all of this in Blender. Blender is like a horrible, weird Frankenstein creature monster that can do everything. And if you learn it, you unlock the secrets of the universe. So you can do this in Blender. I like doing it in Pixelover because Blender has a habit of not playing well when you render out pixel art, especially at like its native resolution. Like you'll lose detail, and I don't like that. But Pixelover is specifically designed for it. It does chunk more. Like this process is a lot smoother in Blender. That being said, just getting it out there, you don't need Pixelover to do this. This will work in Blender. This will work with just actual hand-drawn art. Uh, this is specifically just the way that I do it. Okay, I'm done. I'm done. So now that we have that out of the way, we're going to go to. So you should have this over to the side, and I like to expand this because it dictates what items you can see and select. So like if you see right now, I have this red here on the graph thing. That means that all of the sprites I put in, I cannot select them. I have to do it from the library. I can't do it with the mouse. And that's important because now that we have all of these here, I'm going to select all of the bones and only the bones, go to transform, and put keyframes where I think is appropriate. This is one of the issues of Pixelover chugging. It does not like when you put in keyframes. If you have a lot of stuff going on, it might like lock up and not respond for a little bit. So it's important to keep that in mind. If you notice in transform, I'm only doing position and rotation because I don't. Oh dear, there it goes. I don't need to scale these at all for this particular animation, and I don't need to skew them yet. Actually, I don't even know what skewing a bone does. Ah, I see. I have fucked up. I skipped a pause. It's very bad. Okay, we have our bones set up. Now, what we're going to do is try to make in-betweens, and the rest of this is going to be essentially Animation 101. If you have messed around with tweening or puppeting before, you know how this works. It's like, I'm going to see where the next keyframe is. It's at 0.3. I see that like this bottom part here shifts a little bit, so I'm going to have it go over here right before it changes. Doesn't have to move around a whole lot because it's not important. And we're just going to repeat this process for pretty much all of the bones? I thought those were connected, but I guess not. It's not important. And you can see what I'm trying to do is just make it look like one keyframe is transitioning into the other one. And some parts of this are going to look really rough because you're just moving stuff around and tweaking it and twisting it. So I'm just going to get that out of the way now. It will look jank. Like, look at this hand. That doesn't even look like a hand. That looks fucky. But that's fine. Now, since this is a pose that happens in the middle of the thing, I'm going to play around with some stuff. I'm going to add more keyframes for position and rotation. Go back to here and make this transition into the previous frame, keyframe. So here you can kind of see how like I don't have a lot of room to work with as it's going on. I want it to kind of linger on this position a little more. So I'm going to turn off. So this button here makes it so that you only see the bones that you have selected on the timeline. That way it's a lot less busy work, is what I'm trying to say. Or not busy work, a lot less clutter. Clutter is the word. So I'm going to go to this keyframe, select everything all the way down. Move it over 0.2. And I extended the animation to be 1.2 seconds long instead of 1 second long. So now I can make it transition into the next frame with less fuss. Although, to be fair, I don't necessarily have to make it transition to the next frame. I could just have it jump there. Oh, I like how that looks, actually, like she's kind of flexing her abdomen a little bit. But no, doesn't work for what I want. Actually, what I'll do is I'll make this kind of like a wind-up instead. Have it be a little more exaggerated. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And like I said, the pixels are going to get kind of jank. It's going to get messed up. The important part of it is like you're sticking to the palette. Normally, when you use programs that rotate or mess around with, my brain is too smooth to explain this. We keep it to the colors that we use so that way we can fix it later. That's the words that my mouth is trying to say. So because this is a very sudden movement, position, rotation, put in another keyframe so that she will go back to this pose, and then I'll go back to where she first transitioned. I'm going to give her recoil. It's like she just goes, you know what I mean? She like snaps to it. And I'm going to add a smear frame there too later. Okay, so now we have a rough idea of how the keyframes are going to all work together. You'll notice that there's a bit of a hang up between the first and second one. That's just like, I want it to be there. So that's intentional because there's going to be a lot of pauses in the final shot of this. So now we have that done. One thing that I do with characters like this is usually they have a lot of moving parts, and I like to have those parts done up like this. To where that way I can kind of manipulate them as it goes. I don't need a keyframe on the cloth flaps visibility because it's going to be visible on all frames of animation. Like you see there, it changes to this pose, so I can move it up here. And you just kind of want to have it follow along where it's supposed to be. And I do this for a lot of things that would naturally move around in this way, like hair, not hair, like ponytails and stuff, and wings and tails and that kind of thing. One thing you can do is hide all the bones you're not using, which is valid, would recommend. I'm not doing it here because I'm dumb. I can tweak that by hand. Now this back flap, because I'm not using bones to move it around because it's not very important, I'm just going to give it a position and a rotation keyframe all on its own. Just kind of repeat the process I did with the front flap. Uh-oh, it shows up a little, shouldn't be there. There we go. So this is currently running at 30 frames per second, which is fine. That is a lot of work to do, though, and the whole point that we're doing this is to not do work. We want to use our brains as little as possible. So I like to lower this down to 8 frames a second. 8 or 6 is usually my go-to. I will usually see how this goes, and if, for example, I think that it's too little frames or there's a keyframe that I really want that isn't showing up here, I will adjust this so I have more frames to work with and then trim them personally. I think for right now, though, this looks fine. This is fine. You can see how, like, when stuff moves around, the pixels get all kind of fucky. I need to stop saying that. Get all kinds of jumbled up. And that is a thing that happens, like right here, actually. Perfect timing. But I am going to go back and fix that by hand. And that is what I recommend everyone does. So I'm going to go to Project, Export. And when we export this, we're given like a bunch of different options. Like which animation, if we had multiple we wanted to export, if we wanted all the individual pieces to be separated so we can put them together ourselves. Oh, that's for like if you were doing like a top-down thing. I got confused. But the important one is files. And under files, we can either save it as a sprite sheet to edit it ourselves later, instead of the amount of columns, or as individual PNGs. And this is going to be making 14 PNGs. That's a lot. Let me see if I can trim this down a bit. How do you look at 6? I'm gonna do it at 8, and I will just trim that manually because I like some parts of it at 6. I don't like all of them. Just export. Then it'll run through. And then it will open up the folder containing your exported frames. You can go over them and edit them however you feel like from here. So yeah, that's using Pixel Over to take shortcuts. I will edit this together later, and hopefully it will be coherent enough to follow.